Hi, my name is Brandon Dingaman, and this PowerPoint is about food banks and food insecurity. As of 2018, 11.1% or 14 million households are classified as food insecure. That means 1 in 9 families don't know where their next meal is coming from. This issue has been combated by the creation of food banks and food pantries that try to provide healthy food for those who need it. Food insecurity is not a very well-known issue, but food banks are doing all they can to help the families shrouded in uncertainty. This paper focuses on figuring out what food banks are, how they work, and what they do to obtain enough food for their food bank clients. It also analyzes how food banks do during crisis and how COVID-19 will cause them to struggle to keep up their food production. Food banks basically describe themselves in what they do. They are storages for food that is obtained and dispersed to those food pantries and other free food providers. Most of their food comes from donations or grocery store and restaurant leftovers. The food then gets inventoried and sent out to a partner that needs it so they can feed people who really need food that they can't afford. These food banks are not very well known, but they do a great job of providing some food to the food insecure. The first food bank came to light in the 1960s by a retired businessman named John Van Hengel in Phoenix, Arizona. Van Hengel volunteered at the local soup kitchen and always thought there was more to be done. The idea of a food bank came to him one day by a homeless woman digging through a grocery store dumpster. She griped about all the wasted food and suggested that there be a place where they can take leftover discarded food and give it to those who need it. Van Hengel agreed with this woman, and from there created the first food bank. This industry has grown exponentially since then, and there are over 200 other food banks that have been started across the nation. Feeding America is the biggest food bank network, and it hosts multiple banks across every state. What is food insecurity? It is a rather foreign topic to many that may never have heard of it. It is defined as someone with limited or intermittent access to nutritionally adequate, safe, and acceptable foods. In simpler terms, it is a family that struggles to have enough money to buy enough nutritional food for their families and are uncertain as to where their next meal is coming from. Each state has some level of food insecurity shown in the illustration, and it is due to many different factors. Individuals could be unemployed, disabled, or simply not receiving enough monthly budget to pay the bills and properly support themselves or their family. This can be a big issue for families, and it can cause a multitude of mental, physical, and social issues for themselves on top of going to bed with an empty stomach. These negatives will be explained in the next slide. When households are food insecure, they end up going through a cycle of health issues. Food quality goes down due to high prices for nutritional foods in stores, and stress rises for a multitude of reasons, such as worrying about feeding their family unhealthy food diets and putting stress on their body because the right nutrition is not being achieved. Health problems then soon arise. A study done by Michelle Kaiser and Joanne Hermsen sampled over 500 adults with families who visit food pantries in the Midwest. The sample households were 80% overweight, 17% were diabetic, and 35% had high blood pressure. The U.S. population's percentages for the three health components were only 68% obese, 10% were diabetic, and 30% had high blood pressure. This shows evidence that sample population was consistently less healthy than the entire U.S. population. This then causes health issues, which increases medical costs and decreases the employability of the families. It also then causes even more financial issues, and then the cycle repeats itself again. Now, this doesn't mean that food banks are providing unhealthy food, but that they don't provide enough healthy food to last them the whole month. Food banks are trying their hardest to help out these people, but all of them struggle to receive the same things. The second figure shows that food banks are struggling to obtain milk, vitamins, fruit, and even enough protein-rich foods for a healthy diet. They are all doing the best that they can to fix these nutritional deficits, but enough cannot be done unless the food situation is made more known. The question now is how food banks are able to handle crisis. And to do that, I looked into how the previous national crisis affected them. This graph shows the percentage of food insecurity and very low food insecurity over the years. This shows the impact that the Great Recession, which happened from 2007 to 2009, had on food insecurity, and how it affected them for years after the crisis. 2011, 2 years after the recession, was where food insecurity was at its highest at 14.6%. And then it slowly went down after that, into now at 11.1% in 2018. That implies that a crisis has long-term effect on families and causes a prolonged financial dependence on food banks and pantries. That can then cause an increased population for food banks to feed for a long period of time. This means something worse than the Great Recession can be devastating for the food bank industry, and without proper help, they could be out of the picture for COVID-19. COVID-19 has been devastating for this country, causing nationwide unemployment, temporarily shut down businesses, and financial loss for almost everyone. Food insecurity has increased, and many more are trying to receive food from their food banks than normal. Michael Flood, chief executive of food banks in Los Angeles, reported that food demand in LA has increased by almost 20%. Restaurants have closed and shelves in grocery stores are running bare, causing very little food to be given to local food banks. Flood says that the dramatic increase was way worse than it was for the Great Recession, meaning that it could have an even worse effect on the nation for a longer period of time. They're doing more things to try and help everyone that they did in 2007, but food banks are still taking a toll. Flood stated that the food banks are well stocked now, but he was very worried on whether they could last a long term if nothing else is done to help. There have been many actions taken to help the food industry survive, but there is still a lot of waste going on. Farmers have been struggling to find buyers for a lot of their produce and have been dumping a lot of crops and dairy products due to the lack of buyers, so that some services have worked to bridge the gap between farmer and food bank. The New Mexico chapter of American Friends Service Committee launched an initiative called Farm to Food Bank, where they allow farmers to donate food straight to food banks and provide commission to their local farmers. This was on trial basis, and in the 2 weeks, the local food banks have received over 80 pounds of food, which is equal to 67 meals worth of food. Initiatives and donations like that are crucial to feed the rest of the nation's growing need for food handouts. Another way to help is to isolate yourselves to stop the spread of the virus so that we can stop this pandemic and hopefully be on a quicker path to recovery. If everyone is mindful of their situation, they can shorten the time needed to keep restaurants and businesses closed and reliven businesses once again. Food banks have been impactful organizations that have helped out many families in order to survive and return to everyday life without struggle. From the first food bank in 1960, food banks have spread across the nation to fight food insecurity, a term that much of the country is still unaware of. COVID-19 is a tragedy for everyone, but may provide positive consequences such as bringing people closer together and providing awareness to food insecurity. If the nation acts on this crisis in a positive way, we will come out a better, more stable economy with equal opportunity for everyone to be given a chance to be part of a great society.